Greetings to everyone here today. I am Sharanya, strategy analyst at Tsaaro, and you are listening to Privacy Cast. Today, we are joined by Colonel Binoj Koshy, Army veteran and Vice President at Cyber at Tsaaro Consulting. He has nearly 3 decades of distinguished service in the Indian Army, and he later took on senior leadership roles at UIDAI, where he led cybersecurity for the Aadhaar program, which covered India's 1.3 billion residents. Colonel Koshy brings deep expertise in scalability, cyber resilience, digital forensics, and data protection. We are so grateful to have you here today with us, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, this entire process will be about cybersecurity in cloud computing. So to begin, and I'll cut to the chase, how do you believe should organizations reassess their cloud security posture with the increasing regulatory expectations under the DPDPA and other sectoral guidelines in India?
To make a prelude to the whole aspect, it is to be understood that cloud is the word today. And many enterprises, many industries are moving to the cloud primarily by virtue of the advantage that the cloud has and by virtue of the manpower cuts that is essential, so that to maintain an IT team, it would be quite a difficult aspect. Hence, people do migrate to a cloud service provider. And of course, there are sectorial laws governing subscription to the cloud, primarily because of the fact with regard to security. So, for example, a banking industry may think twice before it migrates its on-prem solution to a cloud security aspect, a cloud deployment aspect. So, there are certain vulnerabilities, there are certain advantages. So, the pros and cons that emanate from the enterprise itself will actually drive an industry to go for a cloud service or not. Okay. Adding to that, we do have a lot of added vulnerabilities that get accrued alongside once you migrate into the cloud secure cloud aspect, cloud. Now, the very fact that two important revolutions have come in at this era makes the security on cloud more challenging. Firstly, is because with regard to the concerns of privacy. Now, when there is a difference between ownership of an infra and, of course, having the ownership transferred to a cloud entity. Now, from that perspective, the privacy aspect is of concern. And the second journey, that the second revolutions that the industry is undergoing today, is the adoption of AI. Now, AI has its own threats in terms of both from a perpetrator perspective and also has its own advantages with respect to usage with it. Now, the adaptation of AI alongside cloud has got a different dynamics of security that is come. Now, let me dwell a little on the DPDP Act perspective. The DPDP Act per se of India does not ever talk about where your services are to be hosted, whether one wants to go into the cloud or whether one wants to stay on-prem. However, as I told you earlier, the regulatory aspects will ensure, like for example, a banking industry, or for example, a most critical military establishment would never like to use a cloud service, and that, of course, will still stay in the ambit of on-prem solutions. Now, coming back to the DPDP Act of India, does not specify whether a service has to be on the cloud or not. There is a vague mention of data localization, yet when it comes to a cloud deployment, one cannot now differentiate between localization and a cloud deployment. So there are challenges from that perspective. Now, looking at the strategic framework, what is essential in terms of cloud security posture, first is the very fact that technology drives a lot of your cloud security aspects. For example, encryption. Encryption may be an encryption of AES 256, may be too less on a cloud deployment, which may require a larger or a much better technology for encryption. Uh, Next is with regard to the data-centric approach aspect. If you look at the vulnerabilities that exist with regard to cloud deployment and the security posture that the enterprise has to take when you look at data centricity, so we find that the cloud is more wider in its form of providing services. So there are challenges there too. Now, lastly, coming to the compliance and the governance aspect. Now, you would see that Government of India has over the years tried to be away from the cloud deployment, and it does not today have a policy with regard to cloud security that is to be adopted. Now, this was for the very fact that cloud adoption was the least in India. India did believe in on-prem solutions, and hence it was more oriented towards on-prem services. Now, India now is thinking, in fact, even government services, if you look at the DigiLocker aspect, many of the components have Government of India itself has moved many services to the cloud by virtue of the ability that it offers to percolate to services across India or to larger mass of people by virtue of deployment on the cloud rather than a NIC based data center. So there are challenges, there are advantages, and all these enterprises need to factor when you look at the cloud security component or the posture that is required on a cloud deployment. Yeah.
Understood, sir. Thank you so much for that. To come to a rather question that would come off as a little rudimentary to you, but this is specifically to cater to the audience who's not very well versed with cybersecurity. What would you say are the some of the critical differences in risk management for cloud native environments versus the traditional on-premises infrastructure?
If this question was asked about 10 years back, the dynamics of the answer would have been different. But by virtue of the maturity that the cloud or native cloud that is adopted by an enterprise or an industry has become more mature in terms of its security. Now, when you look at the risk aspect, yes, there is a salient difference between the security while on prem, risk while on prem, and while on the cloud. However, by virtue of the models that are available today on cloud native approaches that are existing today, the risk landscape has actually become a little more slant, and it is more focused based on uh, the um, the the management of that security rather than when you look at on-prem and on-cloud services. Now, let me focus on just three aspects with regard to the cloud aspect, cloud with regard to the critical differences that exist between the risk of two different environments, that is the on-prem and on the cloud. Now, responsibility. There are large number of responsibilities that now get hived away from the IT setup or the IT managers inside to the cloud service provider. Now, here again, there is a major change in attitude by virtue of the CISO or the security team within an organization to manage this out. You need to have good contracts in place. One needs to know what is the line between security offered by the cloud service provider and what is to be done the at the enterprise end. So there is a salient difference between the responsibility aspect in terms of ownership getting transferred in terms of security to the cloud service provider, for which probably those services may come with a premium that exists. Okay. Then second aspect is the attitudinal change that the IT team or the security team within an organization has to now look at. From a perspective of cloud, if you see, the perimeter security becomes more important now. So the risk focus shifts from identity management that existed within the organization to a perimeter security component that exists, that has to be. Now, last but not the least, there are many more aspects like business continuity, recoveries, and all that, but I'm not dwelling into the technical aspect. As with respect to the management of vendors and third parties, vis-a-vis the risk getting transferred to the third party by virtue of pushing your services to a cloud native service, one has to be more careful in how you draft the service level agreements. One has to be more careful as to what risk appetite can be shared with the third party service provider or with the vendors who are managing these services. Now, Aadhaar has a beautiful policy on this by virtue of adopting the open source technology. Now, what happens is the open source service provider as an OEM is also a service provider within the ecosystem of Aadhaar. Now, so what happens is the risk is actually transferred to the OEM service provider. Of course, Aadhaar is quite large and big in case, but in terms of how you got to manage these vendors, these third parties, becomes a very vital aspect. Now, one use case which I would like to give here to the audience here is that use of APIs. By virtue of you transporting your services onto the cloud ecosystem, ensure that the APIs that interact with your enterprise solution is owned by you. So when the APIs can be then shared or can be utilized over a platform rather than asking your cloud service provider to make available the APIs or the interface to you. So own the API, ensure that there is accountability by these vendors and third parties, and you'll have a beautiful journey on the cloud ecosystem. Yeah.
Understood, sir. Thank you so much for that.